Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. This is so cool that you guys could all come and be part of this. This is our the first time doing People of the Palouse, or People in the Palouse. That's me. I think I'm going to give you a little history of who I am and know how I got here. How did I end up doing this presentation? First of all, I was born and raised in Pullman, and I graduated from Pullman High School. My parents were business people here. They had a small refrigeration and air conditioning business. I have a younger sister. We lived up on Maple Extension in the older part of Pullman. And as a little girl, this train depot, was part of our lives. Trains came through, we'd hear the whistles, we would have to wait for the car, for the trains to go by as we're sitting in the car and that type of stuff. And when I was in kindergarten, I got to ride on, they did a field trip, and we got to ride on, what was it? It was called the Hopper, right, Kathy?
The Bug.
The Bug, that was it, the Bug. And we came down here, and we went down, and we got our little tickets, and we got on the train, and we went to Moscow, and then they had a picnic, so that was super cool. Anyway, I also, I met Bill back there, and we were married in 1970, and my grandmother actually took Bill and I to Colfax to get our marriage license. It was a big deal. She took us there, she was our witness, and then she took us out for ice cream soda afterwards, which was super fun. Anyway, I have two sons, Eli and Curtis, and two daughter-in-laws, Kara and Shay, and I have 7 grandkids, and 2 of them are here today, Olivia and Cordy, and they're Pullman High School students, so that's pretty cool, I think. Anyway, so I'm just gonna kind of, so how I got here was, like I said, I love the train depot, and I had heard a rumor that they were moving the switch engine out, and Bill said, you should go down and check that out. So I was standing over there watching the crane move that switch engine out. It was so fun. And I said hi to Kathy and Linda, and one thing led to another, and Kathy said, oh, we're looking for volunteers. So the next thing I know, I'm in here scrubbing and cleaning, and it's been so much fun. And somebody, was it you, Kathy, that came up with the idea to do this People of the Palouse? Anyway, and so I wasn't at the meeting, but Kathy said, oh, Jamie, we've decided that you should be our first person. And I went, oh, great. So anyway, I'm going to just talk in story form through 3 parts. One, the part of my grandma and grandpa's story during the Depression when they were building the log cabin. And then I'll talk about Penawawa, that's where I came in. And then a little bit about when they lived outside of Colfax. So anyway, I was lucky enough to be born into a 5 generation of this picture here. And all of us girls were living in Whitman County at the time of that picture, which is pretty cool. And this is my grandma Thelma that I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to just read you a couple of things and tell a couple of stories, and we'll get on with this. So anyway, Grandma was born in June 15th, 1908, and her full name was Thelma Irene Richardson, and my full name is Diane Irene Whitman, and so I got her middle name, which is something I've always loved to have. Anyway, she graduated from Colfax High School in 1926, and then she went to Lewiston to community college for a little while. I'm not sure what that wasn't a very long period, probably business or something. And then she met my grandpa, and he was called VanTine, and they were married in August 25th, 1928. And so they were newlyweds when the Depression hit. And so they ended up moving to the Green Hollow area where these pictures are taken to help my grandma's dad, who had a bad heart. And times were really tough in those days, but for me as a little girl, I used to love hearing the stories of what it was like living on the farm. So I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to read to you what I wrote. When my grandma died, we decided to do a kind of a little memory book, and everyone has written just a little memory of my grandma, just a little bit. So I want to read to you what I wrote this in. She died in 1993, so I wrote it then. Anyway, when I was growing up, I thought everyone had a grandmother like me. One who had gray hair, wore flowered dresses, one who always had a huge vegetable garden, one who raised chickens, one who had a root cellar packed with home canned goodies, one who was a fantastic cook, one whose house always had a wonderful clean look and smell, and one who read to me, one who told me great stories of the past, and one who loved to walk in the timber. And that's what Grandma called walking in the woods. She always called it the timber. And she knew all the name of the wildflowers, and she let me iron. And she'd set up the iron, and I got to iron everything that was flat, you know, like anything that was flat. And my mom didn't let me do that. I don't know, you know, why, but anyway. And Grandma taught me how to make crazy cakes, and both my granddaughters know how to make crazy cake. They've frosted more crazy cake cupcakes than you can imagine. And but most of all, she gave me the best gift of all, and that was unconditional love, like only a grandmother can. And you know, I thought everybody had a grandma like that, but that's not the way it is for some people. The most important thing that Grandma gave me, and the things that she told me, and then just the way she lived, was her strong love of family and friends. And to her, I think they were the foundation of life, and that's how I feel about my family and friends. And I'll just sort of paraphrase this. My grandma wasn't perfect. She was kind of stubborn. Bill and I talked about that, the word my mom hated, pig-headed, she could be. And I kind of love that about myself. I can be like that too sometimes. Like I refer to trying to dig out a bush in our front yard. It was, I was determined to get that out, and that's how she was. Sometimes she kind of deprived herself, I think, because of the Depression. Maybe she could have done more fun things, but she didn't want to spend the money. So in fact, my sister and brother-in-law bought a hot tub years ago. And my grandma she said to me, why would they want to have one of those things when they have a perfectly good bathtub? So that's kind of how she thought. But anyway, I'm her oldest grandchild. She had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and I'm the oldest of 6. So I had her all to myself for about the first 4 years of my life. So I didn't have to share my grandma with any other cousins or anything, or siblings. So I loved that. So being the oldest, I got to spend time with her doing things that I always felt welcome to come along, like feeding the chickens, or picking flowers, or pulling carrots, or there was always something to do. And as my family knows, I like being busy, and so being with her was perfect. And the bottom line that I wrote here was, the unconditional love. She didn't care if my room was clean or if I had a big zit on my nose. It didn't matter. She always stuck up for me, and she made me feel safe. And I hope, and I wasn't a grandmother at the time, but I wrote, and I hope if I'm ever a grandma, I can do the same for my grandchildren. And she's a part of who I am, so I think that's pretty cool. So I'm going to start and tell you some stories about when they were moved to this Green Hollow area. They moved down there to, like I said, to help her dad. And when they decided to build this log cabin, and this is, I love these stories when I was little. They had, they had to, I left it. Well, anyway, they got a lot of the logs that had come down from the flood of the 1910 flood. They went up to the prune orchard area and got bricks for the fireplaces. Grandpa worked for a farmer, and they sold cream. I think it was the big cans for $1.50 a can, and Grandma sold eggs for I think there were 6 cents a dozen. And so they lived in a little shed while they were building the log cabin that's right here. And they had a shed, and then they had a wall tent that they slept in. And apparently my mom was up half the night, and they didn't get a lot of sleep when she was a baby, but they got the log cabin built. And I just love those pioneer stories, and this quilt is one of them that came. My grandma's mother-in-law gave her this as a wedding present, and it's mostly house dresses, and she gave. I'm gonna get a drink of water real quick. Anyway, Grandma, her mother-in-law gave her this with $10, and the deal was that Grandma was supposed to finish it. She was supposed to use the $10 to buy batting and the backing and finish it, but Grandma, it was during the Depression, times were tough, and she had to spend that $10 to pay rent. This was before they got into building this log cabin, and so she never finished it. And because I'm the oldest, Grandma, she got about a third of it done, and she gave it to me because I'm her oldest granddaughter and said that I could finish it. So I did about 6 of these, and not for me. And then my aunt, my dad's sister, finished the quilting for us, and it has, it's really special to me because of that, but Grandma was so relieved when it got finished because it was kind of a burden. And so I try not to do that to my daughter-in-law, to give her things. She might have to finish or whatever, but a good life lesson. And then the other story that, and I'll leave the recipe, that has to do with this era. Grandma taught me how to make potato bread, and she didn't, I don't think she wrote the recipe down, she just told me how to make it. And when I was first married, she tells me the story of, I think it was her way of telling me when you're first married and you're trying new things and you make mistakes, it's okay. So Grandma was priding herself on what a good cook she was. She was an amazing baker. And so she was baking the bread, and it did not rise. And she was mortified because she had spent all this money and all these ingredients, and she didn't want Grandpa to know that she had spent all of that money on the ingredients. So it was cold, probably in the winter, and that's probably why it didn't rise. So she took it outside and buried it in the yard, hoping that we wouldn't know about it. And so so then she goes in the spring. She's an avid gardener. She was down there digging on the ground, and she looked over and she goes, "Oh my word! Out of the dirt, the bread was rising." Because she had kind of halfway buried it and put a log on it, and it was just rising up. Oh, it was just there to haunt me. And so I took that, a couple of lessons from that, as thinking, you know, if you make a mistake, best to own up to it instead of burying it. Anyway, so those stories of, I know those were really hard times. Grandma had, her first son was born in the hospital, so during the Depression she thought, the second child, I'm not going to spend the money on the hospital, I'll have a home birth. And she had a very bad breech delivery, and some of these times where they're growing gardens and they're all of those things we look at it and kind of romanticizing and think, oh, how cool that would be, and it is, but there's also the lack of medicine, and when my grandpa's teeth were bad, they didn't have money, so he chopped wood, and they sold eggs and those types of things. And my grandpa also used to work for the county and walk the roads to keep the ditches open. That was a job that they had. And at that time, Grandma also cooked for the, it was the warehouse, they were building the warehouse and working in the warehouse, and those were the people that were filling the sacks of grain and loading them onto in the Manning area. And she said she got 25 cents a plate for, and sometimes as much, I think sometimes it was $1 for the, I don't know, that could have been for the whole meal. But anyway, she cooked for those people, and that was very common in the Depression area, that women's jobs like cooking and taking in laundry and those types of things were available, and they were able to help supplement the family. One of Grandma's, this little dress, or little jacket here, it was a coat, she called it, was my mom's, and Grandma actually bought this brand new from the catalog and spent 98 cents on it. And it was a big deal, and my mom wore it, and my sister's daughters have worn it, and so I didn't make Curtis wear it. Anyway, that was a big deal. And something else that Grandma did a lot of, she thought she was kind of trendy because the shoes were really expensive for the kids, so she said she started the open toe shoe because she cut the toe out so that the kids wouldn't have their feet be, so she was just amazing at those things. She, raisins, for example, were hard to get during the Depression, so she dried cherries and talked about how they were just as good as a raisin in almost all kinds of baked goods. So anyway, I just love those stories, those pioneer stories of surviving on a low income. And there was a motto during the Depression that I read that I thought was really cool. They said it was, wear it out, use it up, make do or do without. And I think that's some of that we should maybe bring back in to our lives. Anyway, so I'm going to move along to Penawawa, and met somebody here today who's from Penawawa. Grandma and Grandpa moved down to Penawawa in 1941, and my mom and her uncle were 10 and 12 years old. And my grandfather worked for the grain growers, for the Whitman County grain growers, and they went down there and they were given a house. Apparently the house was a disaster. They had to do a lot of cleaning and whatnot. And I suspect I assume that that's how Grandma got the job of cooking for the morning freight crew. And probably because at the grain elevator, they opened, they would fill the grain trucks. They also filled barges to the river. But that train came right through Penawawa, and when you can look at the map later, we can talk about that. But their house was right here, and the train track was very close. So there was a house, the garden, and the train track. And so apparently there was people that lived down there that worked for the railroad, and they had a phone, and the railroad would call and say, we've got 5 men coming through. So they would come down to Penawawa and literally stop at my grandma's house, because they were the only train on the line, and to stop the train, and they would get out and go in, and Grandma would make them breakfast. So I don't know how much she got paid for that, or if it a little bit of I think it's probably enough to pay for cooking for them. And but anybody that got to go to her house for any meal was very lucky. And she cooked on a wood cook stove, and you know how hot it gets down the river. Sometimes it'd be 103 degrees, and she made a lot of homemade breads and all kinds of yummy things. And when I was a little girl at Penawawa, the train at night would come through about 2 in the morning, and it was always really fun to hear that for me, because I'm a town girl, so I just thought, oh, here comes this very cool train. And Grandma was really active when they first moved to Penawawa. It was a community. There was a church, a school, a library, and Grandma was a librarian, a volunteer librarian there. And the coolest thing to me as, well, to have a grandma that loves to read to you is amazing. But the bookmobile used to come to Penawawa. And the picture right here, I remember walking out the door right to the end of that sidewalk, and there would be the bookmobile. It was amazing. And you walk in, it smelled so good, and it was just a great experience. And the river was so, my family went there a lot on the weekends. There was fishing and hunting and swimming and all kinds of wonderful things. And I spent a lot of time with my grandma. I think my mom, I don't think that Grandma had to watch me, but I liked to spend time with her, so I'd help her in the garden, and she had chickens, and it was a wonderful, wonderful place to live for them. And the cookies that I made today are, when we would go to Penawawa, my grandma would, my mom would always say to me, don't say you're hungry as soon as you get in the door, because Mom will think I don't ever feed you. And so I just listened to that. We'd get to the door, and that smiling face would say, do you want a cookie? Are you hungry? Well, of course. So these are her orange oatmeal cookies that she used to make. And I also made the crazy cake, and Kara's family calls those wacky cakes. I made those just so that you can have a taste of those. Anyway, Grandma had a beautiful garden. She also, besides being the librarian, she worked as a reporter for the Gazette. She did the little, that's funny, kind of the way it is, it's not like Facebook, but similar. So people would call her, and she would take the news, and it'd be like, Helen McGreevy accompanied her dad, Dan, to the old-fashioned thrashing bee at Whitman County Fairground. And, you know, I have these out that you can read. And she did beautiful handwork. There's, her handwork is good on the back as it did on the front. this little area is her, in her kitchen, she was not a crystal chandelier kind of a person. She was just more the, that plate is her original set of dishes. And I've discovered that Grandma didn't like to have her picture taken very much, because I haven't found a whole lot of pictures of her. This is her high school picture, and there she was in the paper here, and this is her. Anyway, so we had a wonderful time at Penawawa, and it was a wonderful place to be. And it was a sad day when it was flooded, the Little Goose Dam. I think that was 1963 is when that process started. And I was in junior high school, and it was hard to have that happen. But the house, this little house, the grain growers, they moved it to Colfax. And it's in Colfax now, just down from the Perkins house, which is kind of fun to be able to still see that. Kathy and I went and drove by it the other day. So anyway, then in 1965 they moved to the house that's outside of Colfax, and Grandma belonged to several women's clubs. And Kathy, aren't you doing something about women's?
I've done a whole lot of research on women's clubs.
Part of the Hubbard Club and the
vital part of local communities.
Yeah,
vital.
Right. So if you want to ask Kathy anything about those, so she, Curtis just left, my youngest son, but Grandma used to make, as I said, she was an amazing baker, and she always made these sunshine rolls, and Curtis has taken that up and has really done a really good job of making the sunshine rolls. We can all attest to that. We love them. One of the things about Grandma and Grandpa's house outside of Colfax is, again, she had a huge garden and a big root cellar, and there was one year, it was Mount St. Helens, and that was in 1981.
No, 1980.
80. And two college girls were on their way home and got, they couldn't see, driving was horrible and they couldn't see where they were going. And they were lucky enough to be stranded by my grandma's house. So they walked up the road, and she fed them for 2 or 3 days. And they couldn't have found a more amazing place to end up. And we were always grateful it was 2 young college girls that were there. But she ended up, when she left the Colfax area, then she had some poor health, and she ended up living back here in Pullman at that Avalon, but was active in bingo and different things like that. But she was an amazing person, and I loved her very much, and that's kind of my story. We can look at more pictures, and I hope you will all enjoy some desserts, and I have extra copies of the recipes. And since I'm the first person to do this, I could hand it off to anyone here who would like to do this. What are you thinking, Kathy, every couple of months or something?
Every other month. We're going to have a program in here every month, and we're going to alternate between a program we call Book Talk, which is local authors talking about local topics. Our next one is March 22nd at 2 here in the Great Room, and Marty Mullins will be talking about her book on the roads of Whitman County. I'm sure some of you have seen it, but I'm sure not all of you have, and of course she'll be available to autograph copies. Let's sell you one. And then, so every other month, Book Talk, and then every other month, sandwiching between those, will be Palouse people. And we'll have people like Jamie talking about an ancestor, and it doesn't even have to be a relative, but someone that you think made a difference, whether in a big way or a small way, someone who contributed to the establishment of community and culture life in this area, in Whitman County, in the Pullman region. Town people, country people, their lives mattered, and we want to explore those lives.
I was gonna say one more thing about the, this book that I mentioned earlier about all of our memories. I'm gonna have this, I'm gonna leave it here and people can read little, stories out of it. Some of them are really short. My dad tells a story about, I don't know where I was. I guess I was older and maybe hanging out as a teenager with my friends. I wasn't on this trip, but they went to LeClaire Creek. My mom and my dad and my sister, my grandparents, and 3 of my cousins. And apparently my grandpa and my dad had found some huckleberries up, and so they had, my parents had a small camp trailer and my grandparents were in a tent. And they left my grandma back at camp, I love this, with 4 little kids, and they went fishing. She decided she was gonna make pie, but she didn't have a rolling pin, she didn't have pie pans, she didn't have a whole lot of anything. And Dad said that when he got back, there was a whole bunch of little misshapen pies in little Pyrex containers that were the best pie he had ever had in his whole life. So little stories like that in there of memories of my grandma, and I think you'll enjoy looking at them.
Jamie, do you remember anything about the orchards that were down there around Palouse?
Well, my grandparents' house was surrounded by orchards, and as a little girl, I spent a lot of time riding my bike or walking through or picking fruit. A friend, the family that lived behind my grandparents had a girl that was the same age as myself, and we spent a lot of time in the orchards.
Now, were they peach, apple, everything?
Yep, all of the above. And her parents had a packing warehouse there, and I remember the peaches would be, we would ride our bicycles through, and sometimes, you would end up throwing peaches at each other because you'd eaten so many, and then you go to the swimming hole and go swimming. But yeah, they were all, there was a lot of orchards around that area.
Now, were those trees all taken out?
Mm-hmm.
That was
the last time I went there. I was probably about Olivia's age, and it was heartbreaking. They pulled all the orchards up just like you would pull a carrot out of the ground, and they were all piled up ready to burn. But they have to do that so that they don't have all of the debris, along with moving all the buildings and that kind of stuff.
I think they did save a very small amount of the orchards, and they have been replanted. You can go down there and pick the most luscious peaches you've ever seen in your life. It's wonderful.
One place is left.
Yeah.
One place, that family bought that property back from the Corps of Engineers and reestablished the original orchard
And
at
there's
that.
apricots and apples and pears and peaches.
Yeah, and for my grandparents' house, when you look at this map, where Grandpa worked at the grain elevator, and then right behind the house, you can see where all of these were orchards all along. I need to find the original photo. This is out of the Spokesman Review from 1955. And when you come up here and look, this, my grandma was interviewed in the Bunch Grass, which, by the way, you can be a member. My grandma was a member, subscribed to the Bunch Grass, my mom did, and now I'm doing the same. It's really interesting, full of all kinds. Did I give some to you, Cheryl?
You did.
Yeah, and anyway, so Grandma was interviewed. This is all about her story about the Depression, and you can read that. And this display will be down here for a couple months.
2 months until our
Right,
next
so people
Board of
can come
People.
down and look at things and Oh, and also I was gonna say, I just remembered, the grandma was the librarian, as I told you, and, she has a rocking chair that's commemorated to her in the Colfax Library. And then if you go to the Colfax Library, there's some beautiful pictures down in the basement, and you probably were part of that. All of the historical pictures downstairs. There's a picture of my grandma, they're sitting on the porch of the library. It's a pretty cool, picture, but she used to, I brought this book. I actually found it online. I don't know what happened to our original copy, but Grandma always used to read these little books to me, and she would do the librarian style. We'd sit on the floor, and she'd sit like, like this with her glasses on her nose. She would read, and then she'd turn the pictures, and she'd look over the top, like, "Are you listening?" And then one other story of my mom at Penawawa, before they remodeled their kitchen and that wood stove that I was just referring to. Apparently Mom said that at the end of the day, when the stove had cooled down and dinner was done and dishes were done, Grandma would, can you imagine doing this on your stove today? She'd set the oven, open up the oven, and she would sit on that door and read to Mom. And it was warm, still warm. My oven door would just, she would sit and read, and she would read chapter books. One chapter. And Mom said it would just kill her. Just one chapter, but, so that, I love that story of the wood stove. Anyway, well, if you guys wanna, there's some punch that, and these are the, instead of doing flowers, I decided to do a little garden just to represent Grandma. And I tried to do sort of, these are my memories and how I felt about my grandma. And there's a little article here. She was part of the Whitman County Pioneer Picnic Association. I didn't even know they had such a thing, but she did that, and that's why I kind of did this like a picnic thing. So, anybody have any other questions? Thanks for coming, you guys. My mouth was gonna get so dry. When you get nervous. Here, here's some information about that bridge.
Hey, if you're careful, you know what you see.
That one is my Here, I'll leave this.
I see. Giant doors. I see.
She's the same age as John Palmer.
She works at
She lives in her.
What a deal.
I know. You know, all right, we have to have a summer excursion. Very excellent. Thank you. So great.
You know what it's like sometimes. It's a whole